There are hidden patterns that are shaping your reality. And the quicker you are able to, what I call, access the energetics of those hidden patterns that are essentially running your life unconsciously and subconsciously, the quicker you will be able to manifest anything in any area of your life with ease, speed, and most importantly, consistency. So if you're ready to uncover and change the hidden patterns that are shaping your reality, stick around. Sorry, we interrupt this program for cuteness. For cuteness. For a cute swim after our walkie. Good girl, Rocky. Good girl, baby. Jump. Good girl. All right, so let's dive into the mechanics of what it takes to access the energetics of these invisible scripts or patterns that are shaping your reality. Because here's the thing. These energetic patterns are ultimately, largely, unconscious and subconscious. And until you make the unconscious conscious, you will have very little choice, very little ability to create and manifest your results with ease and speed and consistency. So it's really important to understand that when I say everything is energy, right? Like everything is energy, from the chair that you are sitting on to the seemingly physical screen that is in front of us, causing us, to perceive separation between us. But everything, your thoughts, your words, your actions, your emotions, the seemingly physical body that you walk around with, right? Everything is ultimately informed by energy. And the reason that this is so important, that the reason why I call the tagline of my business is access the energetics, is because if you are trying to change anything in your life, in your reality, in any area of your life, whether it's your health, your relationships, your finances, your career, your social network, etc., ultimately, again, like we're dealing with energetics, we're dealing with the interplay, the interconnection of energy at play. And so when you start to master this very intangible, very fluffy level that is ultimately animating all of us and everything, that's when true mastery and manifestation can happen. So what we've never been taught, like this is why I exist and why you've, created and manifested me in your life on your feed, because you are now resonating, right, with my vibration. We are now resonating on a very similar frequency. And that's essentially like how energy works. So the patterns, right, these hidden invisible scripts that are essentially running in the background, that are largely unconscious and subconscious, are still energetic in nature and still exist, even though you can't see them, you aren't aware of them, etc. They still are there. And the more we resist things, right? Like the more we discount things, try and avoid things, try and like seek the positive and avoid the negative, and seek praise and support and not criticism and challenge. The more we create these polar opposites, this polarity, we perpetuate the polarity and the essential charge that is associated with all energy, right? And essentially what energy is trying to do is religate, which is essentially the essence, the etymology of the word religion. It's actually trying to religate, meaning come together to create a union between these two opposite charges or forces to literally create light. And that is when we literally have enlightenment, right? When you start to collapse the charges and not perpetuate the dichotomy of good, bad, right, wrong, etc., and the duality of that, and you start to collapse the charge and you create light, and you literally like feel lighter, create enlightenment in your perception and in your mind and in your awareness, and you start to untangle and unravel and dissociate these hidden, invisible, energetic patterns that are essentially running and ruling the roost. So that's essentially why energy is so very important to understand that we are dealing with. It's not at the level of conversation and words and right, like, which is why traditional talk therapy, coaching, etc., doesn't necessarily always work, because it's at the level, like even as a master NLP practitioner, neuro-linguistic, right, linguistic language, it was super helpful, and like understanding how our linguistics, how our words, internal and external, so like even how we language our internal reality. It's again all language, all words, and words are essentially just sound and vibration. So again, it goes back to energy. So let me give you another analogy just to bring all of these parts and pieces together, right? So the invisible patterns that are shaping your reality are largely energetic in nature. They have been derived from, right, the experiences, situations, and relationships that you've experienced over the course of your entire human lifetime and existence, from all the way back into in utero when you were being formed, and even beyond that. Okay. And why do I say that? Because transgenerational inherited patterns, right, are passed down. So from your genetics are just another form of energetic information that is being passed down from generations to generations. And to some extent, to a large extent, you can't change your genetics necessarily, other than things like that have an epigenetic nature, which essentially is like a whole nother video. But ultimately, there is a possibility to, switch on and off different gene expressions based on how you are perceiving your reality. So the analogy I want you to consider about these hidden patterns are like the film strips that old school cinemas used to project light onto, to project the light onto a screen and play a movie. So the light is ultimately what I call your soul state, right? And the soul state for all of us is our ultimate, when we are tuned in, tapped in, turned on to source of everything, whatever you call it, God, the universe, intelligence, etc. If you are atheist, like you even have to, like this, you exist, right? So for you to exist, there is something that is higher than you and us, and that's created all of this stuff. Whether you believe in a God, an anthropomorphic meaning like man-made religion, right? So all of the religions that we have on the planet today are just man-made. They're actually right. And that's why there's all these fucking wars that are because everyone's identified and associated and attached to their different identities. And that's why identity shifts are not the end all be all either when we talk about manifestation and reaching our highest potential and people talking about having an identity shift or, actually there is an even higher leverage point above identity, and that is the soul state. And that is when we start to access leverage and monetize our unique contribution and our unique soul print, which we have come into this physicality and this physical body to play out and to experience. And so that is ultimately what is going to, so that source energy, right, is the light that is being projected onto these film strips. What are the film strips? The film strips are the different scripts that you have essentially formulated unconsciously or consciously, right, throughout your entire lifetime that tell you how to act, how to behave, what to feel, how to think, etc., based on your parents, how they brought you up, your childhood experiences, your mentors, your friends, your culture, etc., the environment. So that's where nature nurture comes into play, because whilst you can't necessarily change, like I've got whatever coloring I have, I can't change the color of my skin, etc. So that's not changeable. But what I can change is the perceptions that I have, the thoughts, the emotions, etc., and how I perceive my environment and whatever it is, whatever experience I have, whatever reality, whatever movie I am in, right? So that's why I want you to think about these scripts like film strips, because at the moment you might be thinking that these film strips that, right, soul light is, so imagine the light is being shown through a projector. Projector is ultimately your mind because it's the mechanism. So your mind is it's not inside your brain. Your mind is actually outside here perceiving, and it's the mechanism through which you are experiencing and your body is experiencing. It's the transmitter, right, that is experiencing what the light is projecting and what you are ultimately experiencing in your external reality and as well as inside. So we've got our source and our light, right? And the source doesn't ever go away, and it's infinite, and it's abundant, and it's totally vital, and it's thriving, etc. And it's beyond, it transcends all of the man-made identities and roles that we ascribe to and subscribe to in this experience of being a human being. So light, projector, mind. Light is soul, projector is the mind, and then we've got the film strips that then result in the movie and the reality. Like even think about reality TV. Like we are literally in our own reality TV show based on what the projector is shining through. So a key piece of this is these invisible scripts and hidden patterns that are shaping your reality are ultimately just pieces of film that it's sort of like you think, right? Like you imagine sitting in a movie theater now with 3D glasses on, and it looks like you're in it, right? That's why it's so freaky. Like when you start to actually question the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness, like what the fuck, how this all works, right? There's no batteries here, like it just moves. How we actually operate and how all of these dynamics fit together, right? So it's not like we've been taught as we've come into this life, we didn't get a manual to say like, okay, this is how we operate and this is how we work. Like science is still trying, quantum physics is still trying to figure out like how the nature of energy actually operates and works, and black holes and all of this shit is it's crazy, because when we think about it rationally and logically and like there is seemingly physical separation between all of us, and there's seemingly physical objects, right, that like we bump up against. And so when we talk about like energy and energetics, it can feel really fluffy and intangible and like nonsensical and like, what the fuck does this have to do with anything? When in actuality, when you're talking about your reality, there are 80 billion realities playing out and worlds playing out. Whereas we are all ultimately just, comprised of the same thing. It's just that energy is manifesting and vibrating at different frequencies. So it is that, like, it is energy. It, like, point blank, end of story. So you can't really fight with it or try and, argue with it. You just have to master it and start to learn how to work with it. So once you start to do that and you understand that you can actually start to separate from your film strips and start to look at, actually, is this the movie that I want to be in? Is this the story that I like? How is this ending? If we continue playing out this movie on this trajectory, is this the future that I actually would like to create? Or do I want to co-create a completely different outcome in a different frequency? Are these the people, the characters that I want in my movie? Am I the character that I want to keep playing in my reality, in my movie? And so it's possible. But remember that the patterns are these scripts, are these movie scripts that we have to actually look at, because you can't, if you're identified with it and you're just looking through it and you're saying, well, this is what the movie is, you can't actually look to see if you want to change it or take it out and replace it with something different. So it really requires, first step that is required is taking getting yourself enough space and objectivity from and being the observer, right, of your reality versus just being in your reality. There's the actuality, right? There is reality and there is the actuality. So it's almost like if you've ever heard of the NLP term, the map is not the territory, right? So the territory is what is actually possible, right? Where everything is infinite possibility. It's the wave function form of light, because the light is both a wave function, right? Infinite possibilities. It has the potential to be anything, any form. And then when we observe it, which is the crazy nature of from a quantum physics point of view, when we observe and we put our attention on something, that wave function has collapsed to become the thing that you are now observing. So that is the weird, wild, wacky interaction of, that we are not just observers of our reality, we are co-creators of our reality, because as soon as we observe something, we have literally collapsed the wave of infinite potentials to become the thing that we are observing, which means that us as the observer, it then begs the question, okay, like who's doing the observing? And so when we start to unravel and start to become more aware and more conscious of the mechanics and the dynamics of how we actually create our reality. So our reality is the map. It's the representation. We are essentially representing back what we are experiencing in our mindset, right? Like, so we're taking in through our senses, and we are filtering everything, all the data that we are being bombarded with. We are filtering that through all of our past experiences, situations, relationships, etc., and we are then representing it back in our mind's eye and in our own map. It's our own representation of what we perceive to be on the outside in the territory. So if you think about like literally looking at a map, it is not the actual terrain that it represents. It's just a representation, a depiction of the terrain, right? And there's loads of different kinds of maps even that you can have, topography maps and all those different things. So it's really important that you recognize that there is an actuality where like there's infinite things that are possible. And then there is your reality, which you are currently experiencing. And the reality you are currently experiencing right now is old energy that is manifested, which is why when you start to get to a point where like your results aren't sticking, when you're not being able to create the results, or you're sitting there and you've created amazing success and, money and a career and a family and a this and a that, and you've got the stuff, but you're now feeling unfulfilled, or like you just can't get to that next level and it feels like you're hitting one of those ceilings, right? It is absolutely an energetic ceiling that you've hit, because what's happening is the programming, the film, right, is old. It's outdated. It's no longer going to serve you into the future. So what happens is when you start to see different patterns being repeated in your life, and you can't get beyond the results that you've either achieved and that you are wanting to achieve next, it's usually because you're operating from old, outdated scripts or patterns that no longer serve you. They may have brought you to where you are now because they helped you to survive your childhood, how you were brought up. We've all been through big T's and little T's alike, right? A lot of us discount the little traumas that we've been through. And sometimes we don't even recognize that we've been through a lot of little traumas that are as big as one big, massive trauma. Right. So those traumas and that we've all been through, right? That's just the nature of human beings. We've all had suffering. We've all had trauma, because that's how we are learning and growing and evolving as souls. So when you are unaware of how that programming or those events in your childhood, potentially even in utero, like that, because it's all energy, right? Like even when you were in utero, you were absorbing the energy of your mom, of your mom's surroundings, etc. And what they were experiencing, your parents were experiencing, was absolutely available to you energetically. And then when you were born, even though you couldn't fully speak and process all of the information, you were still processing information and you were still experiencing, right? Because everything is ultimately energy and interconnected. So now we talk about transgenerational traumas and the cultural patterns and things that were passed down that you, again, may not be aware that you are operating from. So there are a lot of different sources of these energetic patterns that are invisible in these scripts that we need to access, and that we need to find ways of measuring to make them to make it more manageable for you so that you can change it. So again, these film strips, right, are comprised of unresolved traumas, inherited patterns, cultural imprints, childhood experiences, systemic dynamics that you aren't even necessarily aware have informed you, but are absolutely playing out in your life. And this is one of the reasons why I use tools like systemic family constellations, why I use a lot of profiling and assessments in my work, because it helps you to measure what matters, right? To make this energy tangible and put an actual language and a framework to it, so that you can be like, oh, okay, like this is what's actually driving me. So this is why I use things like systemic family constellations and a lot of profiling and assessments, even with corporates. We go in and measure the values of the employees and compare the personal values of the employees to the perceived values of the collective. Like what does everyone perceive the company to be valuing, right? Because even the company collectively is a system in and of itself and has its own collective energy, collective, right? Like way of acting and speaking and of doing things, right? That's what culture is all about. And so if the values of an individual, right, are not in alignment with the values that they perceive the company to be valuing, and a third dimension of what the company is desiring the culture or the values to be in the future, you're going to have a misalignment, right? So you've got to align all of these different energies. So if you in your life, you know, in your personal life, for example, if your values are not in alignment with what your hidden patterns are, what your stated intentions are, what your new goals and targets and aspirations are not in alignment with what you ultimately, you know, have been brought up with, or what you have been, again, it could be potentially very unconscious and subconscious. You could be like dragging along this weight, right, that is essentially like these shackles and imprisoning you and prohibiting you from experiencing the freedom to create and manifest what you now do want with greater ease and freedom and consistency, and just experience that full fulfillment of it. Because you can't fulfill something that, right, like is still tied up in a prison. So we've got to be able to access those energetics so that you can resolve it, dissolve it, and then free yourself of all those shackles and all those invisible patterns, and start to be able to freely, consciously create whatever it is that you desire with total ease. So this is why there's nothing wrong with you. You don't need to be fixed. You're not broken. You're not doing anything wrong, right? It's just that you potentially haven't yet learned how to access the energetics. You haven't, you know, traditional therapy and most coaching doesn't really access this layer and this level. And so, and even something like hypnosis, where you're like half conked out and like hypnotized, like that's not a very conscious process, and someone else is doing it for you. You've got to build the muscles, right, to access your soul state, to tune in, tap in, turn on your soul state, and tune into your energy and tune into your patterns. So it's a very, as you can appreciate, it's a very involved, right, mastery. Energy is like, it comprises and informs and animates everything. So it's about becoming more attuned to that and more conscious and aware of all the different ways that energy is informing you, and recognize that your patterns and these invisible scripts aren't bad. Your childhood isn't wrong. It happened the way it happened because it didn't happen any other way. And so there are 3 steps that I want you to take right now to start to build this muscle of building energy intelligence, right, to be able to access the energetics. The first step is to essentially get space from your filters and your patterns and your film strips, right? To start to look at them. Start noticing your stories as films, not facts about you, right? And even get curious and just start to be like, okay, like is this storyline, is the script, how am I, you know, so if you start to recognize your childhood story, you could ask yourself the question, like, is this actually serving me now in my present, in terms, and is it going to serve me in the future in terms of how I've been viewing myself, viewing my relationships as a result of this? So for example, I realized that for most of my childhood, I felt like I didn't belong, right? And that I was alienated. I felt like I was different from everything and everyone. That then throughout my, so that was a very early on, like formative years. And then at the age of 10, I unconsciously attracted into myself a near-death experience at 10, where I then felt even more alienated when I came back, right? So now it starts to give me more evidence that I am alienated and I don't belong, because now I like understand that, you know, that everything is energy and everything is interconnected, and I come out like with this whole new perspective on life and everything, and no one else can understand it. And again, now I am even more separated and not belonging to, you know, my humanity, my people, my family. Everyone thought it was a phase and I was going to grow out of it. No one could appreciate it or understand it or empathize with it because they hadn't experienced it. So what does that do? It then perpetuates the lie that I don't belong and that I am different and that I'm alienated. And so for many, many years of my life, I felt like I just didn't belong and I was on the fringe, you know, of everyone else. And that not belonging then creates and has ripple effects and consequences as an adult. So once you collapse the lie and you actually like realize that at that point in time as a little girl, I didn't know how else to survive in whatever situations and scenarios and relationships were contributing to me feeling like I didn't belong, right? And like, I mean, there's so much there that I could go into in terms of like the hidden patterns and transgenerational trauma that was passed down and blah, 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 blah. It's so fascinating, like once you actually start to access this. But in simple terms, once I collapsed that and realized like it's actually a lie, like I do belong, like we all belong to humanity, right? Like we all belong on earth. We are born and therefore we belong. We don't have to do anything special. We don't have to be anyone special. We don't have to achieve anything. We just get to be here. We don't have to, we don't deserve to breathe. We just get to breathe. And it's a beautiful thing. So when you collapse that, right, and it's no longer a good or a bad or a right or a wrong, it just is what it is, right? Because that's ultimately when you collapse the charge of positive and negative and right, wrong, good, bad, etc., and you create light and have insight in the moment rather than hindsight, right, constantly looking behind you at your ass, then things become so much easier to create and to change and to shift because you are no longer, right, at the whim of those invisible hidden patterns. So again, first step, create space from the pattern, right? Like get more objectivity from it and not be so attached to it and start to get curious about like, okay, where does this come from? Like what event in my childhood potentially contributed to this? And then get curious, not judgmental, right? Don't judge it. It happened the way it happened, and it didn't happen any other way. So it's not about judging it. It's not about judging your past or your present, because it just is what it is now. And then finally, it's about asking yourself and tapping into the question of like, what is now possible that wasn't possible before if I'm no longer operating from this invisible pattern or prison? What is now possible that wasn't possible before that I'm not operating from this prison or having this invisible pattern ruling my reality in my life? What is now actually possible versus what is in my reality currently? Because remember, in your current reality, right, it's old energy, it's old intention. Energy goes where attention flows. So wherever you are putting your attention, even if you're putting your attention on what you don't want, you're going to keep creating more of that, right? I didn't think I belonged, right? I was like, I didn't want to not belong, but because I believed I didn't belong and I was resisting not belonging, I was creating more not belonging, right? So it happens in both iterations. Like whatever you think you do want, or if you're trying to avoid something, what you resist persists. And so it's really, really important that you see it for what it is, what it was, what it is now in your current reality, what it was then. Don't judge it. Just look at it, observe it, see how it's been operating and running you, and then Control-Alt-Delete the fucking program, because you don't need it anymore, and like empty trash. And now like install new, updated, fresh software that's like, okay, cool. What is possible now that never was possible? Really think about like when you get a new laptop, it comes pre-installed, right, with all these different softwares and programs. Eventually, those softwares and programming, it's outdated. It doesn't work anymore. And that's essentially what we are now reprogramming, and cleaning up. We're taking all those files that are no longer serving you, and all those film strips, and we're deleting them so that you can make space for new programming. And when you've got new programming, you don't have old patterns interfering and causing delays and slowing down the machinery, the processing, and the resulting like output reality, your reality, your desired reality. Because the light's going to keep shining, right? Like it's always there. So you always have the capacity and the potential to tune and tap in and turn on to your soul state and be the light. So this is more of a revelatory process than it is a fixing. There's nothing to fix. You are not broken. You don't need to be fixed. We just need to get all the shit that's out of the way of your soul state to let that keep shining through and update the programming, the films, so that it shines light on something that you actually enjoy and that is aligned with what you know is possible for you. So that, my beautiful friend, is what today's video was about. Comment below what your biggest insight and takeaway was, so that I know you're here, I know you're with me, I know it's resonating. If you have any questions, pop them below. If you want some one-on-one, because this can be like, it's really helpful to have someone untangle it with you, there's ways to work with me one-on-one in the description below. But thanks for being here. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you are notified when my next video comes out, because I am on a roll for posting videos. I'm really enjoying it because it's fun to get my work out there now, right, in a much more accessible fashion for everyone. So I'm looking forward to doing more of this if I know you're here and I know it's helping. All right, chat to you soon. Bye.